Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Reverend Quirk Thornton. It was a wonderful talk. And now we'll continue with Reverend Dr. Carmela Javellana. I thought that the Catholic Church is so big. You know, when before I'm from Salt Lake City, so when they said the church, that means Mormons or LDS. But then I started traveling around, and the Catholic Church is the one that deserves the church because it is huge. So I want to have both perspectives of a male and a female who's came from the Catholic religion. So today we'll have Reverend Carmela speaking on her experience, her journey from Catholicism, Zen, to Jodo Shinshu. Right? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that very benign introduction. And thank you so much for being here. I'm very happy to share this journey with you. I don't often disclose my own private life because of the nature of my work. So sometimes I feel kind of cheated out, you know, from being in therapy. So I just tell people, well, when I need professional advice, I just talk to myself. It's interesting because, well, I'll start with the bottom line. I think what makes crossing over particularly unique is because we weren't born in the Buddhist tradition. And then we made somewhere along the way these intentional and critical decisions that changed the course of our lives. And I was thinking, I don't even know if I made that decision. It seems like it was made for me. And I was telling Marvin Sensei earlier about how, as you go along this spiritual path, it feels like Amida and Kanon and Seishi threw this cowboy rope and got it around your neck. And then you're going, wait, I'm not going there. And you get pulled into it, you know, your heels dug in the ground until you just go, okay, take me then. And then here you are. So I look at myself, it's like, I'm wearing robes. I'm a priest. What happened? So reviewing the things that happened, the conclusion for me is just naturally feeling like crossing over is like coming home. And I don't think it's just Salt Lake City, Utah. I think it was the whole process of being born in this small island in the Philippines called Panay. And the city is called Iloilo. And the Philippines has 300 years of Catholicism behind it because it was a colony of Spain. And so we look like this, but we have Spanish names. Like Jokoy would say, we are the Hispanics of Asia. So my name that was given to me was Maria Humildad Carmela Jardelesa Javellana. I liked all of them, but the one that I didn't like at all was this name, Humildad, because it means humility. And I'm going, that sounds so ugly. Why would anyone call me humble? That doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, you know, fast forward 6 decades later, it's all making sense. That is what I'm supposed to be working on, is being humble, right? So when I think about life journeys in general, and certainly when I work with specific patients, because my training is also in child psychiatry, I start thinking in terms of development, how one becomes this way. And it's like, you know, dependent arising, right? The principle of interdependence. And so I was studying from the academic perspective what individuals go through as they mature and age. an age in their faith development. And I came across this model by James Fowler. And he is an American theologian, professor of theology, human development at Emory. And he was also a Methodist priest, United Methodist priest. So I'm gonna try to follow this developmental course from Catholicism to Zen to Jodo Shinshu, based on this model for the most part. And I would say that, well, next slide. Are we in?
There's no slide.
Oh, sorry. Oh, there we go. Now you see all my notes. Okay, so that's the second slide. The imagery that you see here is what sticks to me from a very deep self-reflective sort of synthesis over the years. It's very hard to put into words what comes in an image, but the first image that you see on the right is a burning incense. When I was growing up as a Catholic, things were pretty cut and dried. You're born, you're an infant, you become baptized into the Catholic Church, and then you get your confirmation name at about 7, and then you go through catechism, and then you attend your first Mass, and you wear this white dress, and it's all very formal and ritualized. And then growing up, you learn about ritual, religious ritual, which I think really has underpinnings now in the Jodo Shinshu rituals that we go through, especially chanting. The chanting of the priests were, to me, just mesmerizing. I love that in this big, huge hall. And you have this solo voice of this chanting is, to me, a transcendental experience. I didn't care so much about the singing part. I remember when I was in high school, I would bring my guitar and we would sing in Mass. It seemed like a very folksy, sort of irreverent way of doing service, but there it is, because you're performing, right? You're supposed to sound good. But basically looking at this faith foundation that starts at birth, and Fowler calls it the primal undifferentiated faith, which is basically the stage of trust and mistrust. So it could go either way, depending on who raised you, but this infant is completely dependent on its caregivers to either show it and teach it kindness and compassion or cruelty and abuse. So the human being can get screwed from the beginning, just right there. And so when I work with my patients, I see all this religious and spiritual struggles that go way back into their infancy. But the basis of this kind of faith is, of course, personalized at that moment, because the child is the only ego that exists, right? Other people don't exist. It's just moi. I'm the center of the universe. It's vulnerable, it's open, it's tender, and easily corruptible. So that part of it, was okay. I was the youngest of 10 children, and I just tell people by the time my parents got to me, they were tired. So I pretty much had the run of the road, no slippers, home late for dinner, that type of thing. No rules, just climb trees after school. No cell phones, they couldn't find me. It was cool. Then the next stage was age 3 to 7, called the intuitive projective faith. And this is when children learn to memorize prayers, right? and symbols, right? So pictures of Christ on the cross, the nativity at Christmas, the Magi. So all of these images kind of start coming in. This was when my dad insisted that every Lent they would have this hours and hours of radio where the person would be talking about the 7 last words of Christ. It was like a litany. It was like on an afternoon when I'm supposed to be napping, right? So they would go through the 7 words of Christ, like 3 hours, each one of them. And invariably that night, I would have nightmares of this bloody mess of the body of Christ inside this script, and I couldn't get out. So that's probably right. Maybe it was meant to instill fear, fear of God, right? You better be scared because, he died for you, and look at him. It's all your fault. You made him this way. So this is the beginnings of guilt, right? And I'll show you more of the images as we go. But anyway, that kind of all gets downloaded in your hard drive and incorporated into your algorithm. That was also the time when I went to Catholic school with the nuns. And nuns were very strict. There were rules about how long your skirt was supposed to be. They would do inspection of your nails every morning to make sure they're perfectly cut. And then that's when I also learned some of the tricks on how you break the rules. So we had skirts, but we would roll them down so that they were below the knee. Then after the inspection, we would roll them up. It's easy. My parents bought our family home in front of St. Clement's Church, which was run by Irish Redemptorist priests. And so when I see David now, it's like, gives me fond memories of being Redemptorist groupies at the time. My older sisters loved these priests. They would hang out with them after Mass on Sundays, and they would all talk and giggle, and I don't know. It's like, what is going on here? I'm 12. They're all older than me. So it was very confusing. It's like, what kind of relationship is this? It didn't seem right, but it was kind of fun for them, I suppose. I guess that's how you relate with priests, like hands off, but you can have fun in other ways. Okay, so that kind of screwed me up. My parents wanted us to grow up in this Catholic tradition, eventually for us to become nuns and priests ourselves. So from the very beginning, they had this agenda for us. All my brothers went to seminary, all the girls went to Catholic school run by nuns. This one was Daughters of Charity, with the huge wimple, like the wing-like things, So my older brother, all my brothers went to seminary school. They all flunked except for one. And he did become a priest with the Society of St. Paul. And their main vocation was media. And so my brother became like a movie critic and published his, evaluations of movies from this Catholic perspective. And he was the nicest man I've ever met. The gentlest man I've ever met, and the worst disease that anyone could think of towards the end of his life, this rare dystonia that crippled him and crumpled him in constant pain. And he lived like that until, his death. And now his colleagues are thinking maybe they want to get him sainted or something. I don't know. I don't know how they do those saint things. I kind of had my own path to sainthood, which I'll tell you about later. But one of my older sisters, too, became a nun. And she was a nun for 10 years with the Daughters of Charity. She was at the top of her class. She had 2 majors, both summa cum laude. And then she left convent because she couldn't stand politics. I guess they have their own drama inside those convents too that no one talks about. Then she became a social worker. Then she became a probation officer. And then she got married and had kids. It's like, oh, I guess you could live all of your life. You know, you could be a mongrel. You could be a mixed breed. You could do this and you can also do that. Because of that certain mind frame, where she's still very much in this black and white dogmatic phase of the Catholic Church, there were certain things that were not tolerable in the family. There are things you don't talk about, like LGBTQ and gender issues, and not going to church was, you'll be doomed in hell, that sort of thing. Anyway, children from ages 7 to 12 kind of take these things literally, right? Because what else would you do? So children learn that if you don't follow rules, there are consequences. And if you do, then there's rewards. And that's when I kind of found out that I sucked as a Catholic. I could not do that. I'm not opposed to rules, but a lot of them didn't make sense to me. And then going back to the priests, they were untouchables, right? They're supposed to be celibate and holy. So when I met Jerry later, and then I found out he was a Buddhist priest, I was thinking, oh, this is delicious. Yeah. Well, during that stage too, when you're in puberty, right, you start thinking about ego identity and your role in the world. You start thinking about what you want to be when you grow up, kind of thing. And this is when I think I've had some of the most influential conversations I've had with my dad. I asked him, what's the purpose of life? He said, service. One word, service. And so I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. What kind of service do I want to do? Oh, maybe I'll be a physician. It sounds good. And I made up my mind, that's it. 10 years old, I'm set for life. Okay. But then he said other things like, this is the only true church. So what about all those pagans and Muslims, and what happens to them? Do they all go to hell? I guess they do. So that's why they wanted to cultivate nuns and priests to convert people into Catholicism. But when I look at my own practice now, it's about this age when kids start to question their own religious identity. And this is when, in retrospect, I see a lot of them dropping out of their own churches and religious traditions. Oh, and then the one thing that I remember being Catholic was I saw these altar boys up in the altar, right? And they had like these nice togas, and they had towels on their arms, and they were carrying trays, and they were helping the priests, right? It's like, that's cool. And they clean the chalice. Right? It's like, I want to do that. I could do that. That's service, isn't it? So I went to this one brother and I said, can I do that? Can I be trained to be at the altar? And he goes, no. It's like, why not? He said, because you're a girl. What's up with that? So, gender inequality, when you are idealistic about the world and doing service, that just didn't sit very well. Then stage 4 is around mid-20s and late 30s. This was when I left the Philippines to come to the US to start my residency training in psychiatry. And American culture was overwhelming and overabundant the first grocery store I saw, there was mountains of oranges and mountains of fruit. It's like, whoa, this is the land of milk and honey and plenty, you know? And then you get kind of caught up in this profession where you're highly rewarded, right? Although when I was a resident, my salary was below the poverty level, but you know, I can delay gratification, right? But then you get caught up in this capitalistic want, buy, which is still a problem for me right now. I must admit, I'm still trying to learn things from Joro Shinshu to kind of detox from that. But that was kind of a religious hiatus, kind of a period of not being a non. You know, you don't go with that institution. I mean, that's just too esoteric. This is the real world right here, where you're dealing with like real people who are suffering. And in the back of my mind, I really don't know what to do with these people, but I guess that's what training is for. So, okay. So it was kind of a religious dormancy. And then during this period, you kind of see the inner conflicts about your own faith development just kind of take the back seat. And the real meat is finally when you hit midlife crisis. And that is where the picture of the incense stick. Oops, what was that? The incense stick in the darkness was the crisis. Okay, that was the crisis. I divorced my first husband of 20 years, and then my mother died. And then all the lights went out. And I had no religious identity to fall back on, no spiritual identity to fall back on. I was part of the capitalistic milieu where I wasn't Filipino anymore, but I wasn't American either. You know, so you have sort of this very confusing state of who you are, this flux. Definitely a period of transition was very confusing, so very ungrounding. And then I saw this ad about this Zen lecture at the Student Union at the University of Utah. It was part of the Asian Affairs Fair or something, which is interesting because looking back with Jerry's history, he was the first Asian advisor for the student body. He started that office, so maybe that was part of his legacy. But anyway, that's when I first heard this lecture by the Zen priest named Genpo on Big Mind. And my jaw drops like, wow, I've never heard this sort of conceptual and practical way of practicing religion that does not have to do with dogma, but more direct experience. And that's when the lighted tip of the incense stick started glowing in the dark, and was the only thing I had, so I followed it. And that's when Zen began. And that was fun too. So midlife crisis, right? There's so many things about Zen. I will tell you in a little bit. Do I have time? Okay. But the last stage apparently is this culmination of all of the life experiences and learning from different traditions. I tried Methodist for a while. I went to the Jewish Center for a while. Didn't really stick. But then 5 years after doing Zen, I thought I was going to be ordained as a monk in that tradition, get my head shaved, That's probably why I got my head shaved at Tokudo. So there's a zen-y part of me there. Jerry says it's ego, but that's what you learned from Zen is ego. It was all about me, self-discovery, self-revelation, self-realization, and then only to find out that all of that was bogus. There's really no self. So the Jodo Shinshu part was when I met Jerry, which is interesting because our friends think it's still a joke. At that time, they didn't have dating apps, but they did have Yahoo Personals. And I was divorced from my husband then, and I thought, I'm a marriage person. I like being in a relationship, but it's got to be the right one. After 20 years, that first marriage was what I considered my path to sainthood. That's when I gained my superpowers. So sort of a separation, individuation from a very retarded and developmentally delayed sense of self. So I went online. They had this thing called Yahoo Personals. You put your profile in there, and then they match you. So they said, "Oh, we found your match," and I went through, and there's like all these handsome guys that want to walk by the beach and eat dinner at candlelight, and I'm going, "Come on, is this real? Is this are they just saying that?" Well, actually, I tested out. Test drove a couple of guys, and one was a motorcyclist, with a little goatee. It's like, And then another one was a martial artist who was also a ballroom dancer, too good to be true. He was very articulate. So I met him up at a library, and then he turns out to be a guy that sets up TV antennas. That was his real job. And then he was trying to be funny, and he said something that I don't remember, and then he pointed his finger at me like this, almost like, "Oh no, bad cheat, ain't going there." So then I found Jerry's profile, and no picture, just a very coming from the heart sentiment. All I really would like to meet is a kind woman. And I'm going, I can do that. I've had years of training, as a health professional. I've been abused. I know what kindness is. So I wrote him back and I go, "Is Kuan Yin kind enough for you?" And it's like, bingo! That's kind of where it all started. That was how Amanda found me, it was through him. So, yeah, like I said, right, you get dragged through the coals and you resist. And ultimately, you just have to surrender because you really can't do anything. This is like the utter helplessness, right? Which I'm fine with now, but try to tell that to a depressed patient. That's a whole other conversation. But anyway, the imagery, which I kind of ran out of topic now, that started out with the incense stick led to the Zen non-dualistic view of everything, that form is emptiness and emptiness is form. And that's the guy on top of the mountain, right? So you could see both the valley and on top of the mountain. So to me, it felt like the first stage of this spiritual development was climbing up the mountain with lots of effort, lots of sorrow, lots of trouble and obstacles. Then you reach the top and you go, "Whoa, this is really cool," but ultimately I can't live there. They don't have Costco there. They don't have IKEA or TJ Maxx, it's a nice view. So that for me, that was Zen. So then the last picture on the lower left is coming down the mountain, heading towards the Pure Land, It's time to go home now. It's been a day. Okay, so when we go to the next slide, I was telling you earlier, with Catholicism, shit happens. That stage of faith and moral and psychological and ego development. For me, the SHIT stand for the S being a sinner. You start out being a sinner. And then you distinguish the difference between sinner and holy. So it's very black and white. And then you conduct an inquiry about what this means in your own life. And then you discover that there's a God, theism, the man in the sky. And then you learn about contradictions, not paradoxes, but contradictions. It's either heaven or hell. It's either good or evil. It's either sin or damnation. And how rules are impossible to follow. Like the one that strikes me the most is, thou shalt not say the name of God in vain. And then in Shinshu, I learned, heck, you better say the name of Amida as much as you can. It's okay. There are conditions if you want to be a good Catholic. You have to, like Robert was saying, think of a good sin to confess to your priest, because you cannot have communion. You cannot receive the body and blood of Christ unless you've gone to confession the day before. And then you eat this tasteless little wafer thing that you're supposed to believe is the body of Christ. I mean, I had a hard time with that one. It's like, this is really not necessary, you know? I think the chanting is good. Maybe the sermon is good, but I guess there's value in ritual that way. It has to be concretized for certain people. So I was thinking in retrospect, I think my parents like that, you know? They develop all the way to the stage of maybe mythic, literal faith, okay? Justice and fairness, good and bad, evil and non-evil. There's a pecking order. I remember distinctly when they would have conversations at the table, because I was the youngest. They would tell me, children are not supposed to participate in adults' conversations. And I thought, that's not nice, but actually in retrospect, that was part of my training already as a Jodo Shinshu priest. Our practice is deep listening, right? So you shut up. Because when you shut up, then you can hear. When you're talking, you can't hear anything except yourself, right? So I feel bad for you. And then this imagery of Christ on the cross. I mean, that really freaked me out, seriously. I had nightmares about that stuff. To this day, I get scared of these images of punishment, especially in the afterlife, because I know I can't do Catholic. I'm not a good, I can never be, meet the requirements, right? In fact, I would say I had an inferiority complex because I would see my dad pray for hours after Mass. And my mom would do her social work, recruiting families to send their boy to seminary to train as a priest. And she succeeded because she was able to send my brother and a really good friend of his to be ordained at the Vatican. So that was like big deal, right? Two Filipinos. But yeah, that guilt and shame and repentance was all part of the psyche that you learn as a Catholic, which I think is what drove my parents to be the devout Catholics that they are, and also my siblings. I couldn't do that. I didn't know really what right or wrong was in a very black and white sense, because there were situations, right? There were ethical dilemmas. Which is what being Buddhist is all about, right? You're always kind of screwed up that way. So then the next step is that But I felt like when I found Zen, it felt like I was in a residential treatment center. I lived there at the Zen Center, meditated for 14, 15 hours a day, weeks at a time in a sesshin where you're supposed to be really quiet. And then soon enough, I discovered I can't be quiet. I have to say something. I was living in the second floor of the Zen Center, and Bruce, the cook downstairs, would say, I know you'd be awake, because I would hear these footsteps go boom, 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 going down the steps. Zen people are very quiet. So you have to tiptoe into the Zendo. And I was so full of myself, just kind of clueless, that I was noticed everywhere, right? You stick out like a sore thumb. So they called me the mascot of the Zen Center, and it was a butterfly. But yeah, Zen was a very peaceful way of reworking my entire adolescence. I lived there for 6 months. I reworked age 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18 at warp speed. So the Zen Rehab phase is what I call shift happens. And all the concepts that stuck with me were the concepts of shunyata, or emptiness. So this self that I think I have does not exist, okay? Nothing exists, but yet it's something there. That was very healing, because it was ultimately a way of relinquishing the self-attachment, which you would get stuck in when you're doing sesshin, right? You're with yourself, so you're stuck. But at the same time, when you see that, you're unstuck. So it was insane. For the first time, I realized I was a paid mental health professional who was the insane one, and my patients were totally normal. Being alone in the Zafu was very empowering, in that I can be alone now for the entire experience of my life, with people in a big family and relationships and having serial boyfriends, kind of taught me that, I can do this. Because really, that's what it is. You sit with yourself all day long and you drive yourself crazy. And it's okay, right? And once you embrace that insanity, then it's peaceful. It's cool now. We have instructions when you sit on the cushion, right? Die on your cushion. It's like, what is that? Maybe you can do that. I can't do that. I like myself too much. But then you also learn about jiriki, right? It's all about self. Me, me, me. So I have trouble now with this idea about self-esteem. It's like, what is that? Why do you have to have self-esteem? Are we supposed to learn that we are the recipients of infinite gifts from others? What is this thing about self-esteem? If anything, the esteem goes to all the beings that are out there that rescue us from our predicament on a constant basis. That's in retrospect now, learning about Jodo Shinshu. But, I kind of like the intellectual masturbation that we did there, the conceptual ideas about non-duality, the abstractions, right? I really like that. That was very geeky to me. I learned about deathlessness, because if you don't exist, then who's dying? Well, who's living, right? So if nobody's there, who cares about living and dying? Which can be an issue, right? Because you get stuck with that, with this sense of wisdom, I suppose, that leads to maybe this guruism, like there's inner circles of students, right, who are about to receive transmission. from the teacher. And I feel like an outsider. I don't think I could bow 3,000 bows in a day. I mean, it was impossible. It was difficult to be a Zen practitioner. It's rigorous. I can barely sit with whatever text I'm reading, without having to be medicated. So I've had to find ways to deal with my ADHD in raw form. And I can't tell you how excruciating that is when you have 100 chickens running around in your head in different directions. That's what having ADHD is like. But, that was very grounding too. That's when it occurred to me that everybody needs sanctuary. Because of all the chaos that lives in your head. So really the chaos out in the world is nothing compared to the chaos that lives in your head. And so there has to be some sort of sanctuary. And that's when I started my psychiatric practice that starts with the word sanctuary. So my private practice is called SHIN, Shin, okay, which is heart mind, right? So I thought, oh, that's really cool. PLLC, Professional Limited Liability Corporation. The H stood for healing because that's what I experienced at the Zen Center. So sanctuary for healing and integration. When all the pieces start coming together, but they're a totally different configuration from where they started, which fits me much better. And I go, well, if that works for me, maybe it can work for other people. I can offer it to other people. I mean, if I'm going to be eating lunch, we might as well eat lunch together. So I tell the drug reps, they want to come see me and give me lunch. I said, well, I have this other stuff. Staff? Are they just going to sit there watch me eat, or you're going to feed them too? So everybody gets fed. And then we have like a little community, right? Where we are educated about this particular medication, which when you look at it later, it's kind of like a little bit coercive, right? But it's like, I can be corrupted to some extent. I mean, lunch is good, right? It's okay. And then I realized I couldn't sit. It's too wiggly. And then that crisis with my mom dying, it's like, I was 42 and I'm going, oh, you idiot, you're 42. What the hell makes you think you're an orphan? You're a grown person. What's wrong with you? But yeah, it really kind of felt regressive. Though my mom was the matriarch in the family. And she grounded everyone. But now that she's gone, it's like we're all floating in the air trying to figure ourselves out. So that's kind of how controlling she was, or defining she was, this little woman. So I have the sign in my office that says, every time I open my mouth, my mother comes out, because she very much lives there. So after Zen, then I met Jerry, and I'm going, there is something here that is engineering my life. All the amazing things that have happened to me and all the unfortunate things that have happened to me were really not my fault. They just kind of happened to me. I just happened to be there. Well, in this case, fault meaning implies to powerlessness, right? It's like, I didn't do it. Things just kind of happened to me. So that's when Jerry introduced me to Jodo Shinshu and the Salt Lake Buddhist Temple. Next slide. Shinjin happens. So I went from shit to shift to Shinjin. So the S stands for Salt Lake Buddhist Temple. I said, you had a temple here for 100 years and I didn't know about it? What is wrong with you? It was just a very nondescript brown building that's been there. It's like, how come you don't talk about this stuff? He started telling me about Shinshu, and I go, I've never heard of that. What is that? So Jerry was my first teacher, right? And then I started coming to his Dharma talks. And it's, instead of this intellectualizing conceptual ideas of emptiness and form and all of that, he was telling stories about his kids and ordinary life and the goofs that he did. I mean, I think Jodo Shinshu priests are so good at making fun of themselves. And I'm going, I've never heard these kinds of Dharma talks before, right? But at the same time, there were kernels there that were easily digestible. Zen was so conceptual, and Catholicism was so black and white. That was kind of hard to make relevance in your own life. You had to kind of figure it out on your own. It was kind of unguided. But for me, Jodo Shinshu was structured enough, especially when I encountered Nikon, which was a very structured form of self-reflection that inevitably ended up in this sense of awe and indebtedness and gratitude. It's like, wow, gratitude is really not that simple. It's actually very complex emotionally and psychologically because it's a mixture of guilt, right? That self-responsibility, your own participation, repentance, remorse, and then there's awe. It's like, wow, I could have been in bigger doo-doo if this hadn't happened to me. That sort of thing, being rescued from my own foolishness, right? And then kind of this deep sense of indebtedness is like, man, I can't give enough to all the people who took care of me. I mean, I'm totally late. I better like hurry. It occurred to me, MD, it's not really stand for doctor of medicine. It really means major debt. And I'm in major debt. I owe so much and it cannot be compensated. So you just kind of work like a dog that way, which is fine with me because that's part of the complex, I think, about, well, having an inferiority complex. You're kind of the underdog anyway. So I'm cool with that now. It's fine. Then, of course, the H, right, in Shinjin, is this Harano home that who adopted me. I felt like I'm, a stray from the street and was like taken in and given this comfortable place. And it's like, oh, I actually am being taken care of for the first time in my life. I always thought, why do I have to take care of these people? Like, what about me, right? Who takes care of the caregiver? That was my koan. Well, Jerry took care of the caregiver. He's definitely more skillful than I am at home because I don't have any domestic skills because he said I had slaves growing up. Well, in Philippine culture, you always had a maid that nannied the kids and did the cooking and cleaned the house, for a salary. He said, they were slaves. We sent them to school. So I grew up with a nanny who did everything, including fold my clothes. So I had no domestic skills at all. So I told him when we got married, you're going to have to cook because I don't do that. We're going to starve. But this is the kind of nurturing that was really new to me. So this home, the Harana home, and then the I was IBS, and now not irritable bowel syndrome. Although he gave you that, But all the academic and well thought of teachings that were put in such a way that were so eloquent and so clear and so humble. I think about my teachers, right? Kuwara Sensei, Osmodo Sensei, even Harry Bridge gave me an A- because I didn't know how to write a paper. We've never written papers in med school. You don't do that. It's like, what's this, Turabian? What's that? I've never heard that before. The academic study was fascinating to me. I felt like I was bitten by a bug. And I just could not get enough. And then you crack open the collected works of Shinran. It's like, holy cow, what is this? It's like going into a Pandora's box. Thank goodness he said things over and over again. So I was too dense to get it the first time. So then the Nembutsu was what was calling me the whole time. I just didn't know what it was. Okay. At the time it sounded like you suck as a Catholic. That's not for you. And then you suck in Zen too. So that was like what that call sounded like. It's like, this is humbling, like you said, right? And then Jinen, I love that word, Jinen, this to be made, or the naturalness. It's the way it goes. It's made into that. And that happened to me. It happened to me. I didn't make it happen. So I was being transformed this whole time. And of course, the infinite, right? The infinite that is not tangible but yet real is right here with Shinran's teachings. He talks about the mundane and the super mundane. So I told Jerry, I think it was Amida. It was the mumbo jumbo of Amida Buddha that led me to you and answered your post. And then once you get there, right? Once this bug bites you, it won't let go like a Rottweiler. So you kind of enter the stage of non-retrogression. Right? You're forever. I can't ever think about being Catholic again unless, I go to a mass and now I can see it with new eyes. That this is the way that works for some people, and it gives them this peace of mind that did not work for me because I was too stupid. But now I'm learning as a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist. I learn about Tariki, other power, right? Because in circles, they talk about higher power. Well, hierarchy, right? I don't like that. Then Renyo pops up, right? We're all here. We're all fellow travelers. Ondobo, ondogyo. I'm just as screwed up as you are, which is very refreshing to me. So I tell that to my patients and they go, huh? That just does not make any sense. Well, let me explain. And then the humanity comes out. So my patients don't call me doctor anymore because it's almost like a imposter syndrome. I'm playing a part here. I mean, I'm just as miserable as you are, except that I could bullshit better. I like the term eshin, this heart, mind turning, right? And I experienced that in my Nikon retreat. I mean, I cried buckets. We sat in our little hoza for a whole week, contemplating on what did I receive from my mother, what I gave my mother, and all the troubles that I caused her. And it's like, oh my gosh, I was evil. But the evil word is not like the evil Catholic anymore about damnation and perpetual punishment. This evil now is more about sesshu, being grasped by the Buddha's compassion. I mean, I can't tell you how touching that is, right? Because I've always felt like I was ignored as a child. So I tell people my head is flat because as a baby, I was forgotten in the crib. But actually, that was the way I liked it. But this sesshu, this grasping unconditionally, this evil person, this akunin shoki, to me, it was a head turner. It drove me insane. It's like, wow, mind blowing. And with that comes anjin, right? This sense of peace and got nothing to worry about. So the question, it becomes how I can impart this to the people I work with. I don't do public talks. I mean, David's amazing. I can't do that. I don't like giving public talks because I feel like I'm just all over the place. I mean, I medicated myself today, but it doesn't seem like it's working that well. But I do intimate one-on-one conversations, like, like Buddha Smurti, right? Eyes on the Buddha, mind on the Buddha, because there are no distractions in my office. And then I go upstairs and Jerry talks to me and it's like, in here and out there, like I'm gone. Meds have worn off. So I could do one-on-one really well, but in groups, like at the table last night, they were having conversations here and they were having conversations here, and it's like, I didn't know where to look. Like, what's going on? So the Tani show number 3, right, really resonates with me. If a virtuous person can be born in the Pure Land, how much more an evil one? It's like, that would be me. Good, count me in. Right, this sense of belonging and great gratitude, at the same time, feeling kind of stupid, right? The inferiority complex, right? It's great to have. You should try it sometime. It's therapeutic. I think I'll introduce that into my therapy work. Try having an inferiority complex. So the sinner in this case is also unconditionally loved. You don't have to think of a good sin, right? You're already a sinner. It's okay, it's enough. And this fear of death that I have as a Catholic, because, if you don't clean up every rice on your plate, you'll go to hell for that or something. Think about the starving children in India. That's what they would always tell me. So this guilt, right? Now I'm learning that guilt is not a burden, it's a virtue. It's a virtue, because without guilt, you'd be a total sociopath. So I tell that to my patients too, because they're guilty and they think it's a bad thing to be guilty. And I go, that's just your wisdom talking to you, that you screwed up. And you know what? We all screw up. What's wrong with screwing up? Well, it's painful. Well, then what's wrong with pain? Haven't you had 3 babies already? You know what pain is. I mean, that's just how it is. But I think it gives people a better sense of realism, that when they don't get what they want, that's okay. And if they get what they want, that's great too. And that you can't really have expectations because you don't have any power over that either. So just wash your dishes and your dishes will be clean, like that. Just do you, basically, right? And to me, that means that when we die as human beings, we are born in the Pure Land, right? With the Nembutsu. You articulate the Nembutsu, it's like, boom, you're there. Well, not even before that, right? The Pure Land's already there. So for me, that sums up this essential teaching of Joe Shinshu, Shinjin Shoin, Shomyo Hon, right? Shinjin is the cause of birth in the Pure Land, and our response is gratitude. Last slide, please. So in summary, this is kind of what that journey looks like. Is Zendo's parable, right? The beast and the bandits, were all of these foundational challenges in faith development from childhood all the way to adolescence, and basically demons, right, that plague us as we go. And then when I went to Zen, I learned about death. The point of 3 deaths: die on your cushion. And then Shinshu showed this tiny little 4-inch path between the river of anger and the river of greed. And when you walk that path, you're not really free of anger or greed. They're going to hurt you as you go. But when you keep your mind on Amida Buddha, right? And then there's this nag behind you, Shakyamuni, saying, go. I mean, I'm used to nagging, being nagged at. So it's like, that's cool. I could do this. I could be nagged. And then there's another voice on the other side going, come, you're okay too. I mean, you're screwed up, but you're okay. There's a path that sinners and screw-ups and the damned, can walk, but yet not miss out on that transcendent experience of being held with this unconditional, firm, unwavering love. And I think with that, at the core, if you really believe that, no matter how hard life gets, it's like, how hard can this be, right? And then you go there and you go, oh man, this is really hard. This is more horrible than I thought. But you get kind of through it. It's okay. Namandab, namandab. I mean, if you don't know what else to say, because when you're traumatized, words leave your brain. Your verbal areas just go black, right? But if the Nembutsu lives there, you can still say it. Namandab, namandab, namandab. So some of my patients are going, I am going to print that and put that on my desk. They've started to show interest in Jodo Shinshu. And I told them, well, it's not therapy, okay? It's the reality of this life, and it can really suck. But when you look at all the causes and conditions that come to your rescue, no matter how screwed up you are, you're gonna be fine. You're gonna be angry, but you're fine. And with that, that's kind of where things are now. I'm fine with not being fine, and I'm not fine with being fine, but who cares, right? So crossing over for me is intentional, but yet also mysterious. It's an irresistible hook like this that eventually you just stop fighting, then you just surrender to, and then you just okay then, all right, take me. This ego surrender, so much easier. It's like being driven, in the passenger seat of the car, and Jerry drives and puts on the music. So easy. Thank you very much.